Welcome to the SolidWorks SumoBot assembly tutorial number 1. In this tutorial, I'm going to be showing you an overview of an example chassis. Here it is. And then I'm also going to talk to you and show you some examples of how to create what are called sub-assemblies before you create the entire assembly, which is called a master assembly. So this will be focused on the overview and the sub-assembly. So here's an example of a design using the materials that I'm giving you for the SumoBot. In this case, this is a robot that has 2 motors, one on each side. You can look at the drivetrain. This is a 12-tooth gear attached to a 40. The 40-tooth gear and the 22-tooth gear attached on the same axle. They would be press fit, for example. And then this 20-tooth gear is driving a 40-tooth gear, which is then attached to a wheel. All right. So this would be driven on these 2 sides, and then these other 2 wheels would be there just to help the robot roll. Okay, so here's some examples of how to create what are called sub-assemblies. And the reason you would do what's called a sub-assembly is that a lot of these parts will be easier to put together in smaller sections, and then you can insert them into what's called your master assembly. So we're going to start off with the motor mount and motor and this 12-tooth gear, the smallest gear that you're given. So we're going to create a new, instead of creating a new part, we're going to be creating a new assembly. And we have to find some of the components that we're going to be inserting. A quick note here, this doesn't matter so much for this assembly, but whatever part you insert first is going to be fixed in space. It will not be able to move, and the other parts will need to move around it. So in the case of the motor mount and the motor, I'm going to consider the motor mount itself like the fixed object. So I'm going to go and find the motor mount, motor bracket it's called. There we go. I'm going to place that in space. I'm also going to insert the motor itself. SumoBot motor, there we go. And I'm going to insert the gear, the small gear, a little bit later. Okay, first of all, to mate these things, it looks like the cylinder of this motor should fit snugly in the cylinder right here. So if I select that outside cylinder and this cylinder, you'll see that they'll mate together. Click check mark. Now those things are mated so the cylinders will be touching, but this still has the freedom to move back and forth and then also to rotate. In this case, I don't care exactly where it is. I could come back and change that later if I want. All right, next I'm also going to insert the gear. And this is called the 12-tooth gear with a small hole for motor. Insert. Place it somewhere in space. And then there's a couple things I want to mate here. In this case, I'm going to mate this plane, or that face, I should say, and this face. So I'm not clicking on the edge. I'm clicking on the face itself. When I do that, it makes them parallel to each other. So right now it says coincident. These faces are coincident. Actually, I want them coincident, not parallel. If they're parallel, they could actually be anywhere lined up. Coincident means they will be in the same plane. Okay, check mark. So the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make them concentric. So I'm going to find the inside cylinder of that, click on it. Outside cylinder of this, click on it. And then those things are now going to be lined up. Okay, again, this motor can still move around, but the gear itself is attached to that motor. That's going to be good for that. All right, I'm done with my mates. I'm going to save this. I'm going to call this file, save as, and this is an example of what's called a sub-assembly. Let's go ahead and rebuild. That's fine. I'm going to call it motor and motor mount sub-assembly. Since I've already titled one of these, I'm going to call it sub-assembly 2. Okay, and I'm going to minimize that. All right, next let's go back to our original drawing. This would be something that I've already drawn out on paper, and I've gone through the process of doing CAD just so I knew what steps I would be going through. But you would be going back to a drawing on paper. The next thing that I'm going to be putting together are these 2 gears, the 40-tooth and the 20-tooth gear. So I'm going to create a new sub-assembly or a new assembly. I'm going to browse and find that 40-tooth gear. Place that. I'm also going to browse and find the 20-tooth gear. Place that. Okay, So we have a few things. This will be very similar to what we did before. I'm going to mate first the two planes. So this plane, and you can see how there's kind of an inset in this gear. That plane is going to be up against, the yellow plane is going to be up against the blue plane. Check mark. And then I'm also going to make these two holes concentric. So I click on the inside cylinder of both, check mark, and we're done. So these actually, this 40 tooth gear, since the first thing I put in, that can't rotate or move. This one could still rotate. I'm going to call this file save as, I'm going to call it a 40-20 gear sub-assembly. And again, since I've done this already, I'm going to call it assembly number 2. Okay, next, I'm going to do the 40 tooth and the wheel itself. So, file new, assembly, browse. Okay, what do I need? I need the wheel. There we go. Insert. I also need, insert components, the 40 tooth gear. Place it there. This will be very similar. I'm going to, sorry about that. I don't need to insert. I'm going to mate this face and this face. I'm using this scroll bar on the mouse to move around. So these things are lined up. Now I'm going to select the two cylinders, make them concentric. There you go. That is attached to the wheel. Okay, I'm going to call this the wheel gear sub-assembly 2 again. Okay, now going back to our master assembly, I'm kind of splitting this up into smaller parts. We've done this, we've done this, we've done this. Next, let's actually assemble all 3 of these things together. Sorry, let me try that over. Let's actually assemble this, the 40 and 20 tooth gear combination, and the 40 tooth and the wheel combination together in its own assembly. So new, assembly, and let's see, what do I want? I want the 40 and 20 gear combination. There it is. Place that somewhere in space. And I also want to insert the wheel and gear sub-assembly. That is coming up because I didn't close that file. There we go. Okay, so now let's talk about how to mate these things. First of all, let's look at the gears. This is not actually what your gears look like. If I were to zoom in on this, the gear itself has teeth that come up and go in. The lines that I drew here show the midpoint of the teeth, basically. And in order for example, this yellow and this blue to line up right, you just need to make this edge touch or be coincident to that edge. And in real life, the teeth of the gear go below and above that line, and they will mesh correctly if you get those distances right. Okay, so let's do this. We are going to mate. First, let's mate the planes of these two things. So I'm going to mate this and this I want lined up. But I actually, the way, since I want the 40 tooth here and the 20 tooth here to actually touch, I need to flip that wheel. And here's how to do that. There's a button that says flip mate alignment. It's also right here. It says mate alignment, anti-aligned. If I hit either of those buttons, it's going to flip it around so that those two planes are still lined up, but they're lined up with this being flipped. I can click it again, and it's going to unflip it. You can see how in both cases those two planes or faces are lined up. This is what I want that to look like, so I'm going to click check mark. All right, next I want to make it so that this gear is physically touching that gear. It doesn't matter which edge, but I'm going to click on one of these edges and one of these edges, and then make them coincident so that they're touching. And I'm noticing here I actually got the wrong edges lined up. So we'll come back and fix that in just a minute. Now, zooming in real closely here. So that edge, and this edge are the two that I have lined up. The next thing that I want to do is make this face parallel to that, see, the face that it should be touching, which would be that face. So I'm going to select on this face and this face. They are coincident to each other. And in this, now those gears are really lined up. Okay, check mark, I'm done with my mates. Now, as I mentioned, I made a mistake with which faces I mated here. So I'm going to go back. If I click plus on the Feature Manager design tree by the mates, I can go see the mates that I did in order. The first mate, the mate that I want to change is this one. So I'm going to click on it and click Edit Feature. And actually, in fact, I'm just going to right-click and delete it and try it again. Okay. Part of the reason it made this hard to line up is that this gear is actually in the way. And so there's a way for me to get rid of that. If I go up and find that 40-tooth gear, I can click on the part symbol or icon, and I can make it hide the component. It'll look like it goes away. Now I can go back and do the mate that I wanted to do. Mate, those two faces are the ones I actually wanted lined up. Check mark. All done with that. And then I can go back to that 40-tooth gear, click on that icon, see how it looks transparent now. It's just the lines. I can go Show Component, and there it is. It comes right back. Okay. You'll notice, actually, I've got an issue here with the way that these two things are lined up. I'm going to leave that as is right now, but if I wanted to fix that, actually maybe I should fix that. I'm going to go back to this mate. Looks like I actually don't want, sorry, this is the last mate that we did now. Looks like I actually don't want the yellow face to be lined up, but I actually in fact want this face and that face to be lined up. Flip. Check mark. Done. Okay, so that is looking good. All right, we are almost done with this. We're going to File, Save As, and this is also a sub-assembly. I'm going to call it Gear Train Sub-Assembly. Also going to name it 2. Okay. I think that's about it for this tutorial. Going back to our master assembly, in the next tutorial I'm going to show you how to put these components together in what's called a master assembly. So that's it. Go ahead and watch tutorial number 2.